lost, but held on to power through the coup that almost succeeded, in Congress at least. And then we would have been in a very different reality. Well, one sensible Congress policeman perhaps saved us from that fate. So I'm of the view then when politicians don't actually actively do harm, it's already hallelujah, and we should be pleased. So I think the phase of actually undermining and possibly destroying international institutions and the Western community is over, and that's already a good thing. And the first signals from the new administrations are on the whole good, with some caveats. I'm pleased that the NSC has produced a paper which is being analyzed in the EU and compared with a similar strategic EU paper, and I bet you they will coincide to a large extent. We've suspended the silly WTO process over and sanctions over Airbus and Boeing. We are now spending trillions of euros and dollars, and so a dispute from 15 years ago over relatively trivial amounts of money should be got rid of. And we have the Biden administration's plans both for domestic investment and for collaboration with the EU, not just on the China file, but also on things like reforming the global taxation regime, which I think is a really welcome development. And today we'll have the climate summit. The speeches to the Munich Security Conference and to the European Council were well received. So I think the ground is laid for a return, not so much to business as usual, but to mainstream American politics of nurturing alliances and building some new ones. I think the Biden administration agrees with the predecessor on China that it's a problem. It will try to deal with it by different methods, more multilaterally, more by constructing an alliance of democracies rather than just unilaterally. And I think here they can count on support. I've been the author of the EPP strategy on China, which has now been unanimously agreed for the first time. And what we say chimes in with what Tony Blinken is saying. We say collaborate where possible, compete where needed, and confront where necessary. Of course, we don't have military assets out in the Far East, and we're not allies of those fellow democracies. The US is, so that'll be a difference there. But I think our challenge is to maintain trade with China while at the same time maintaining our alliance with the United States. It will not be easy. Europe can play a good ally and a moderator of the Sino-American rivalry at the same time. Where I have some doubts is on two decisions. One a decision, one an intuition. The decision to withdraw completely from Afghanistan is risky. I mean, the United States is militarily present in over 100 countries. Would it be really so difficult to keep 2,500 troops, maybe even less, but maintaining one base, say Bagram, with some predators, as a symbol of American presence in Afghanistan, in support of the civilized government in Kabul, and as an insurance policy against the resurgent Taliban and the possibility of some terrorists regaining a foothold there. I wonder. And the other worry that I have is that this administration seems to be going wobbly on US sanctions on Nord Stream. That this administration wants to have a reset with Germany, which is a good thing. But when having to decide whether to favor Central Europe and Eastern Europe, Ukraine, or Germany on this, I see at least indecision at the moment. And as you know, the thing about sanctions is not good enough to impose them once. You have to follow them because different companies get contracts and you have to sanctions have to be a moving show to be effective. And I wonder if they are determined to do that. I hope they do, because the sense of betrayal here in Central Europe will be profound if it doesn't happen. And lastly, let me just say that I think Biden will make his China coalition an alliance of democracies. NATO will be promoted more strongly as an alliance of democracies. And that will make Hungary, Turkey, and Poland more uncomfortable. And if I were to advise the Polish government, I would say, well, you need to address your rule of law problems, because quite soon you will not only be on the wrong side of the EU, but also you might find yourself on the offside with the United States. And that's, for a country like Poland, not a comfortable place to be in. So Poland has a particular problem, namely it willfully identified itself as a Trumpist island in Europe, and I'm afraid we will now pay the consequences. Thank you.
Thank you. Now that you mentioned this particular aspect, and I'm turning to Katalin Czech from Hungary, of course, I'm sure she will also tell us how Hungary is dealing for quite a much longer time with being, avoided by U.S. administration on the direct, on basically being directly invited or visiting either Hungary or being in direct touch with the administration, which of course relates to the Polish question. But more broadly speaking, how do you see, from the point of view of also sitting, in the European Parliament and the European Union overall, all these questions from the question of state of democracy to these more particular questions, and perhaps you will want to touch anything of the other elements that also relate to new taxation on big tech, which is now being discussed and I guess open on the table, but also you being a doctor yourself, a medical doctor, anything related to COVID policies and response to that. Katalin, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wojtek, and first of all, many thanks for inviting me at this event. I do believe it's extremely useful to have this conversation, even though in virtual form everything is a bit less fun than in person. I hope we can get to this quite soon. But yes, I think if I want to start with a broad picture, I believe that the last 4 years really taught the world that what happens when the US is not there. When we have a US that follows this isolationist, individualistic path, when the global democratic order does not have a strong ally in the form of a US president that treats their partners rather as his fiefdom compared to equals. What happens when the multilateral order is being rolled back? And at this point, of course, we are at a new beginning, but we Europeans, we really also have to learn from what happened and draw some conclusions to ourselves as well. I very much welcome this new opportunity the Biden administration gives to a strengthened and rebuilt EU-US relationship. However, I do believe that this relationship has to be also based on equality. And the EU, I think, has learned over the course of the last years that we cannot rely solely on the US at so many issues, starting with defense. I suppose when NATO was challenged by President Trump, we Europeans started to take a long, hard look at how we function in that area. And I think that those voices, starting by French President Macron, for instance, who called for a stronger EU in the field of defense, has to keep on being loud and vocal. Because even with a strong and internationally more open US presidency, the EU has to grow up to certain challenges. Because these challenges are there. And frankly, I believe that they were nurtured by certain actions of President Trump. If we are talking about this issue from a Visegrad perspective, for instance, Mr. Sikorski very rightly touched upon this issue at the end of his intervention. We don't have one Trumpist island in Europe, but many. And I would dare to say so that they are not even Trumpist islands, but populistic, autocratic islands. One is my country, Hungary, but there is this illiberal rollback that's been going on in the EU. And this was certainly empowered by a US president who very openly championed thoughts and ideas that would otherwise be incomprehensible from a global leader to say so. And right now, there is this moment of truth coming. For my country's leaders, certainly. We are in a strategic position, and we see that the tensions between the US and Russia, US and China will just continue to rise. And in the transactional world of Trumpist foreign policy, it was perfectly okay for many European leaders, such as Viktor Orban, to do this limbo between the Eastern autocracies and the Western democracies, and acting as a Trojan horse within our alliances, given even the US president did not give too much thought to multilateral organizations such as NATO sometimes. But right now, at one point, they have to choose sides. And it's extremely worrying to witness how much many countries in our region have lost or compromised their pro-European Atlanticist identity that I believe should be at the core of our foreign policy, not only ideologically, because of course I do believe that Hungary and also other regional powers belong to the West, but also because this is a safe place for us to be at. And I'm quite sure that the challenges that is posed to the entire Western alliance by, for instance, the cajoling of Mr. Orban with Chinese and Russian leaders, be it on the Huawei problem, on the 5G infrastructure, be it on the Budapest-Belgrade train line that is built by Chinese loans and basically serves as an extension of the Belt and Road Initiative down to the Piraeus port from the heart of the EU. And also the construction of the new Fudan University campus in Budapest, which, well, many believe that has quite strong national security implications. These won't be unnoticed. And we have to make a reset also in our minds and in our policies, because I think that for our region, this current administration can also be a huge opportunity. Mr. Biden knows this region well. Mr. Blinken knows this region well. And if we choose to act based upon the same principles that Mr. Biden hopes to construct his foreign policy on the principles of the protection of human rights, democracy, anti-corruption, we can be a strong regional ally of a strong US president. And I think this is something also we need to very briefly touch upon. I don't want to talk too much because, well, of course, we need to open the discussion as well. But the fight for human rights globally, the fight against autocracies, the fight against global corruption, and against climate change can only happen if the US and the EU work together. We as the EU, we need to be more assertive in our foreign policy roles. And I think for that is a good start, a good start is our climate diplomacy. Because we very often do not think much of ourselves as Europeans when it comes to our influence on global issues. But on climate, we are certainly frontrunners. And I very much welcome that many other countries are following our lead. I hope it will be the same when it comes to more human rights-based trade agenda, stronger sanctions on violators, and a stronger multilateral order, because we Hungarians, Central Europeans and Americans, I think this is what we ask our leaders to do.
Thank you, Katalin. Now, turning to Vladimir Bilčík. Vlado, my question to you immediately, but choose not to answer at this stage, because I'm sure you have prepared also some remarks, opening remarks, are what hurdles also do you see in this, ahead of the US-EU for the future of the EU-US relationship? If you try to elaborate on that along with your prepared notes, that would be fantastic.
Thank you very much, Wojciech, and it's always a great pleasure to accept an invitation from Visegrad Insight. Thanks to Magda for putting this together. I think this is an extremely timely discussion. I'm very happy to be here to be joining my colleagues from the European Parliament. And I've been listening to my colleagues, so maybe I'll just start by reflecting on some of the remarks and answering your question. I was intrigued to hear especially Radek's remarks on his recent trip in the US and basically a conclusion that the jury is still out there in terms of how the US is going to treat some of the issues, particularly when it comes to the reset of relations with the EU member states, but also engagement in our neighborhood, including, of course, some of the key issues pertaining to how we deal with Russia. And here is the underlying question, business and geopolitics, business and values, business and political and security issues. In this sense, I think the bigger challenge or the bigger ball we need to kind of tackle here is the unity of the European Union itself. Yesterday, we had a very good conference in the EPP group on the Future of Europe conference, which is going to be launched later in May. And I think this Future of Europe conference should not really get stuck in institutional issues. Of course, institutional issues are crucial in the end, and we need to look at them in terms of how it can improve the workings of the European Union. But we need to look at the political and policy-making questions in terms of what Europe can do better together. And of course, there is one area of health, for instance, which was suggested by Chancellor Merkel, who joined us in the conference yesterday. But I also think we have a huge challenge when it comes to external relations, when it comes to really showing that we can still make a stance and be a real power internationally. We've been on the losing end of this, given the situation in our neighborhood, which, by the way, has enlarged in recent years thanks to Brexit. We now have neighbors all around. And none of these neighbors may be particularly friendly at different times. So this is a huge challenge. And I think here, if we want to work well together with the United States, we need to be very clear on what is the European policy. And here I'd like to also echo what Radek said. I'm very happy that he authored an excellent paper on China as a starting point for our discussion in terms of how we deal with China, which is no longer just an economic partner and power, but is a huge political and geopolitical and security challenge. So when you ask me where I see the big problem, I think it's whether we in Europe can actually formulate clear enough positions on a number of issues which bind us with the United States, where it can be stronger together internationally, because there is a lot more that binds us that divides us. That's always been clear. We just couldn't work very well with the Trump administration. We have much better opportunities with the Biden administration. And here, let me just say where I see the opportunities and where I see really also the importance of having a strong common voice in the European Union. One concerns our neighborhood. And in the European Parliament, I'm especially engaged in the Western Balkans as the rapporteur for Serbia and chairing the delegation for Montenegro. When I look at the neighborhood, particularly at the Western Balkans, we are facing a hybrid warfare when it comes to daily events, daily politics. It's not just the issues in Ukraine, in Belarus. The East is extremely important, but also the Western Balkans. And I think this is where, with the US, we can make a difference. And also in terms of the US Visegrad 4 cooperation, we can try to make a difference. We've promised the Western Balkans the European perspective. It's been a standstill. Things are not moving. There are reasons which have to do with the region, but there are also reasons which have to do with the fact that we in the European Union have just really not taken the opportunity to be a lot more geopolitical, a lot more forthcoming, and a lot braver when it comes to enlargement and the European perspective. We need to do this. Otherwise, we will be taking each day a step back away from more China, more Russia in our backyard. And this is our backyard. This is our European territory, which I think should be a part of the European Union. We are investing heavily in it, economically, financially, and we should be as well politically. And so I think we can really, with the US, work a lot better when it comes to the Pristina-Belgrade or Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, when it comes also to making a real push for reforms in the region and support for the European forces in the region across the Western Balkans. We need at least one or two good stories from the Western Balkans. We're not getting them. We are now discussing what is the European future of Montenegro, which has been the front runner and which has a new government, and of course is under a lot of pressure from China, Russia, and other external forces. So that's one region to focus on as well. I wanted to bring that in the debate, and I think we can also make a difference when it comes to facing Russia. And I think we should really be really clear on this. Next week we'll have a debate in European Parliament on Russia because of Ukraine, because of Navalny, but also because of what's happening in the Czech Republic. And I think we need to stand by our Czech friends, and we need to be really, really clear that what we've learned about the explosion of the arms depot in Vrbětice is an attack by Russia's secret services on a territory of a NATO and an EU member state. And we should really show full solidarity, stand by the Czechs, and be consequential in this. And this should be also our guiding principle when we discuss how to deal with Russia in coming weeks and months, how to deal with Nord Stream. And yes, we have a lot of convincing to do also with respect to our German friends and partners. I know that Germany is very divided on this issue, but I think we can still win this jury and have also perhaps a good tipping balance when it comes to the US approach on Nord Stream and the Eastern neighborhood. And one last point, which I'd like to bring to the debate, because we've already touched on China and some of the global issues such as climate. I also think where we can make a difference with the US, and we need to cooperate a lot more. And this has to do with the essence of democracy and representative democracy, is the online digital space. This has been a huge challenge when it comes to the workings of public debate, democracy. It's been captured by manipulative disinformation, which has also been spread from Russia and China, but also within the European Union, and which consistently undermines public discourse at our democratic institutions, makes people uncertain about also how to face COVID, undermines the vaccination efforts. And we can only do this if we have strong European rules when it comes to the digital online space. We have a chance to do this with the Digital Services Act. But if we are to be globally strong on this, I think we need to work with the US as well. This is not about putting limits on the freedom of speech, but this is about really making some clear joint, ideally global rules which will make the platforms a lot more responsible for the content that they spread and the speed with which they spread the disinformation. And I think this is, again, one area we should explore a lot more with our American friends. And this is also in the interest of Central Europe, of the Visegrad Four, where some of the regimes we have in our region, particularly in Warsaw and Budapest, benefit greatly from the disinformation campaigns, which are also spread among the population online. Mm-hmm. So this is where I would end it as a kickoff, and I very much look forward to having an exchange on your questions.
Yeah, thank you. And this is exactly where we will already begin our, let's open up for a Q&A session with questions and comments that can pop up in the chat box. I already see some comments with hot news, Slovakia expelling 3 Russian diplomats, as we are discussing. And you can also raise your hand and ask questions. I see already Matthew Bryce, where I will definitely ask Matthew as the first one then, just hinting at the direction that I hope we will also discuss. A very pressing issue, situation in Ukraine, on the borders of Ukraine, where Russia is mounting up the presence that enables it to conduct military operation in Ukraine, basically an invasion. And the question of what EU can do in this pressing situation in coordination with US on the question of its immediate security nearly at its borders. I mean, it's in a neighboring country. Please do not answer immediately, but I'll give the floor now to Matthew Bryce, and I'll see others lining up, and I'll give you the floor to speak. Matthew, the floor is yours, and I'll ask then MEPs, our guest speakers, to answer.
Yeah, thanks, Wojciech, and thanks so much for organizing this fantastic, fascinating discussion. And I guess I'm going to direct my question to Minister Sikorski, who has had his own adventures in Afghanistan as a Deputy Minister of Defense way back when. But I building off of actually what Katalin Czech was saying about how across Europe now, there's a question about the reliability of the United States now after the Trump experience in a strategic sense. And so how much merit or how much import do you place in what you raised, dear Radek, in the beginning as one of your worries, the US full pullout of Afghanistan? I mean, when you were in Washington, did that feel like it's indicative of like a continued isolationist trend or strategic drift in Washington? Or is the strategic and systematic thinking we all know in Joe Biden with NATO at the center and being tough on deterring Russia, is that more prevalent in Washington, or is it too early to tell? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Sikorski.
Well, I think President Biden will be the first US president since the fall of communism who is not trying to do a reset with Russia. All the others tried. We even had a doctrine of the Polish foreign policy that every US administration learns Russia afresh.
Totally.
And here, I think it's interesting. I think Putin misplayed his cards so badly that the Democrats are now tougher on Russia than Republicans. For self-preservation reasons, yeah?
Totally.
So I think President Putin will pay a price here. On reliability, I'm not worried about America's friendship for Central Europe. I'm worried about its ability to help us, given the scale of the China challenge, on which Democrats and Republicans agree. This will consume all the bandwidth and much of the resources. I think you can already see that Middle East is being downgraded, and one wonders what happens to us. I mean, the Russians have just announced that the exercise around Ukraine's borders is over. Good. But did we hear any practical steps that the United States was willing to make to help Ukraine? Well, what I was saying to my interlocutors in Washington is don't waste this crisis. If Putin is threatening Ukraine, that's a very good reason to help Ukraine. I mean, I wonder if Trump knew about the delivery of the 50 Javelin launchers to Ukraine. But you can't defend a country with 50 launchers when Russia has 13,000 tanks, right? So, so there is uncertainty. I think the match here in the Far East would be over Taiwan. Both Ukraine and Taiwan are exposed to America's geopolitical rivals. Neither of them is a formal ally. Each is at the end of almost impossible logistical lines. And each has to wonder whether the US would go to war for them. But, you know, these are dilemmas that that probably are difficult to solve. The one thing that that would be seen as reassurance would be to stop Nord Stream. And you know, maybe there is a middle solution here for the US. If the US can block it till September, then, and if the Greens join the German coalition, the problem may solve itself.
All right. Thank you very much. I see a number of comments which I will choose now to read, just that you have a chance to relate to them. Iji and even earlier, Iji Schneider and even earlier Radu Albu-Kamenescu pointed to, well, 3 hours ago we learned that, or a little bit earlier, we learned that Russia is actually ordered withdrawal of the troops. Definitely something everybody was waiting to happen. And now the question is from Iji Schneider, what will Kremlin ask as for a gesture of a de-escalation, or what will it get? Perhaps something to consider in this debate. Vlado, maybe you jump in here. Maybe I can ask you for this question, and I'll relate the other question that is there also in China to Katalin in a moment.
Thank you very much. I also just caught the news as we were speaking that my country, Slovakia, is expelling three Russian diplomats from Bratislava. They have 7 days to leave. I think that is a very good and a very important gesture. I think our Czech friends need this sort of show of solidarity at the moment when they basically have no longer an embassy in Moscow. And I would hope that other member states actually follow suit. I do remember when we had the Skripal case in the case of the UK, there was a broad reaction across a number of EU and NATO member states. I do believe that we need to act consequently in this case as well. So I just wanted to put that in because we have a number of conflictual fronts with Russia. And what's happened in Ukraine is part of a pattern we've been watching ever since perhaps the resurgence in the war in Georgia, over Georgia back in 2008. You know, this is part of a pattern, part of a trend. And when you're asking me, Wojciech, that question about what Russia is going to ask or we should do as a sign of perhaps goodwill following the retreat, I don't really get the question because, I mean, Russia created this tension in the first place. So, you know, we are just, if this means that we shouldn't expect any immediate attack when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, that's good news. But I don't think Russia, quite frankly, should be expecting anything because this is not the game we should be playing. I do believe things have come to the point where clearly the regime in Moscow is showing that there are very few limits it's willing to consider in its actions. And in that sense, we do need to take Russia very, very seriously obviously as an extremely important partner, but most of all at the moment, it is an adversary. And we need to confront it as such at the level also of European politics. We cannot pretend to be doing business as usual. I agree with Radek Sikorski. Nord Stream 2 is one thing. If we stopped it, that would certainly send a strong message, because politics, finances, and economy it's one business when it comes to Russia. Very much concentrated in the hands of the very few who are on top of the power game in Moscow. And I think this is what we need to have in mind. You cannot really separate the business that you do with Russia from the politics. So that would be my remark. And I don't really think that there should be some sort of a weakening or any forthcoming gesture at the moment from the EU side, because Russia has created this tension in the first place. However much it's wanted to put out a very different narrative about the potential conflict in Ukraine, placing the blame on Ukraine itself. Already, this is the story we've been hearing in the Russian media for some weeks now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. I wouldn't find better words to say that. Thanks, Vlado, for that. And yes, I think Iji must be satisfied with this answer too. Also, from a perspective of Czechia now missing at our table, if only we had Czechs, that would be a V4 debate. Truly, that would be even more things to say on what Russia needs to do, right? Rather than what we need to do to give to Russia. Now, Katalin, turning to you on the question by, I hope this is Joseph Quinn's indeed asking this question in the chat box. Asking on the divisions within the European Union as a bloc, not only in the region, but also particularly in the region on the question of China and how that is building the dynamics on the US-EU relationship. If I may just highlight here, you remember, of course, the 3 Cs initiative that was immediately initiated in the presence of Donald Trump, and then it was, of course, I would say even hijacked by the opponents of the European integration within particular countries of Central Europe. But wouldn't it make sense to use all possible means, including such platforms, which were designed to oppose Chinese interests in the region, to put them on the agenda of Europe and make them European Union platforms in order to advance further and to combine strategic interests with US somehow? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I agree with what you said. I think we should definitely use these platforms and look into other avenues where we can improve these kind of policies. But on the general question that was not posed by Joseph Quinn, if I see it in the chat, it was somebody else who is not Joseph Quinn. So I think the question itself, what is written in the chat, has 3 parts, I think. It's about the public attitudes on China, on Russia, and on the US. And the original question was asked in the context of Hungary. So let me just start by that, and I will link to other points. So first of all, I looked up past numbers. And unfortunately, this change in the approval of the US is very clearly linked to the presidency of Mr. Trump. Before that, during the Obama era, these numbers regarding the favorability of the US as a strategic partner were much higher. Also, the approval rating of Mr. Obama was much higher compared to what Mr. Trump managed to deliver. So first of all, I would think that a change of leadership, a different kind of policy making, a less erratic behavior from the US president, and a more openness for issues that matter to our region will certainly help. Stability, reliability, and less Twitter antics. This probably helps. But I wouldn't tie this issue very directly to China or Russia as it stands. I think China in general had quite a successful move in our region with certain parts of the Belt and Road Initiative. Because if you ask an average Hungarian person that what comes to their mind when you think China, they will probably say something about cheap small stores that are open until long and we sell like, good products and maybe, Chinese food. So right now in the discourse, unfortunately, we just still don't talk about the geopolitical challenge, the human rights issues as much to penetrate the general discourse, and where the average citizen would be reminded that a partnership with China is not only about, being able to buy cheaper clothes, but actually on the fact that these clothes were produced by the stain of the blood of laborers in the Xinjiang region, that they would probably, not be so eager to wear if they would know about it. So I think awareness raising and a clearer confrontation on both geopolitical and also human rights grounds with China from the EU and also from national leaders will certainly need to happen. Russia is, I think, a bit different. I think Russia's approval in our region is mixed, at least due to historic ties. But how to bring the public on both sides for a paradigm shift towards China, I think awareness raising for sure, but also smart policy making. We are recently adopted parts of a due diligence framework, which will also be expanded in the future. And I think that we have to be very, very vocal on how we protect our strategic infrastructures from an unreliable partner. And why do we do that? Why is it important? Why is, for instance, 5G is not only a matter of, who is the cheapest, but also a part of who is the safest. We also have to ask this question publicly, that if Ericsson can build a 5G system in Vietnam, then probably Ericsson will be capable of building a 5G system in Europe as well. So supposing these questions very clearly for the public so that they know about the dilemma, and also be much more forthcoming with the sanctions framework that we can use, and explain to the public that why do we do that. And let me just say that for this, the unanimity that still has to be upheld is clearly not helping. Recently, the Hungarian side vetoed, for instance, the statement on the new Hong Kong legislation, probably linked to certain close ties to China. So we have to be stronger, but also we have to be more clear towards the public that why do we do that? And this is probably something that will be able to change people's minds, because let's face it, the real challenge is not really about perceptions, but it's rather whether we want to be on the side of the autocracies or in democracies. Do we want to partner with our transatlantic allies, or venture into more difficult waters at our strategic areas as well, with partners that we should not necessarily rely on? And this has to be translated in a way that the public also finds it finds it close to their lives. But this link has to be made, and this was not made yet, I think.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for your answer here. Now, we might have time for just one or maximum two questions. Ricardo Silvestre signaling he's asking a question now. So from across the continent, Portugal, right? Ricardo.
Thank you, Wojciech. Thank you so much for doing this, and thanks for taking the question. I'm going to piggyback on what Vladimir was saying, and I'm very interested about this 100 days of Biden-Harris administration, because we did saw during the Trump administration a push regarding digital, the digital realm. Like, for example, we saw antitrust laws by the Attorney General Bill Barr. We saw senators from the Republican side asking for the end of liability shield. For example, this is still ongoing process on the courts regarding the Attorney General in New York trying to regulate digital platforms regarding speech and regarding threats to democracy. So in your opinion, in the three of you, do you see this scaling back a little bit in the United States, and maybe Europe can take a little bit of the lead in here? or do you think that this pressure will continue to grow? Thank you.
Excellent. And before I give you all of you, I will ask you to relate to the digital questions at hand, also including the taxation, the potential taxation of the big companies, tech companies, which I think is a gesture towards Europe, but of course it is also dictated by internal American politics and demands, the plans of the U.S. administration. Let me just refer to additional questions that we may not be able to answer, but still, there is Michał Korakowski asking on Biden administration continuation of Trump administration initiatives to operationalize DFC, to a tool to balance China's influence in finance. And there is also a question from Ray Vucic, who is not Joseph Quinn. He's questioning about the U.S. military focus on China. He writes the U.S. will be more focused on China, but not abandoning Europe, of course, not adding large numbers of troops or amounts of capabilities either. How does Europe strengthen its defense pillar? How does it, builds up its own response to security threats? I couldn't imagine a better person to begin now than Vlado. I'll let you, Mr. Sikorski, to conclude the whole panel discussion then, addressing also all of this. Vlado, you've been also touching base on some of these questions in your career.
Thank you very much. I'll, for the sake of brevity and clarity, I'll stick just to the digital question because that was directed right at me. Look, I do believe that one of the key issues for this European Parliament, for this European Commission, is to really agree on rules when it comes to the digital giants, the online platforms. We have important political and legislative proposals in the pipeline in the European Union, softer ones such as European Democracy Action Plan, and harder ones such as Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act. These are already heavily discussed. We've actually had a very good conversation on these issues also with some of our colleagues across the Atlantic. And I'm convinced that we cannot have legislation on the social platforms built around a single, even a larger member state in Europe. We need to have joint European approach. That's also going to be to a benefit of us in Central Europe, particularly the smaller but also medium-sized countries. I think this is absolutely necessary. And I do believe as Europe agrees on these rules could become a real platform for discussing some of the global rules which we have when it comes to dealing with digital space. I mean, digital revolution has been one of the biggest changes we faced, and it's brought some very positive consequences in terms of the exchange of information, but it's also brought some detrimental consequences, let's face it, for the way our politics is organized. I mean, we saw it live in the US, what happened in the Capitol. And this was no coincidence. Of course, it's all ignited also by the way the politicians use and misuse the social platforms. But I think this is why we need rules. And I think we can get decent, good European rules, which will protect, on the one hand, free speech, freedom of opinion, on the other hand, really control the massive spread of manipulative disinformation. And this is something that we should address also jointly with the US when we look at some of the issues we are facing. If we are serious about protecting representative democracy on our two continents and also in the wider world, I think we need to also have a frank and honest and joint approach to the digital tools, which are now so dominant when it comes to democracy and democratic discourse. I'm absolutely convinced here. So I think Europe can be a rule setter. And I think Europe can also work together with the US on how to make these rules work globally. This is certainly one of our key priorities also in the European Parliament. We have a special committee, by the way, which is devoted to foreign interference in our democracies and also disinformation. So follow our work. I happen to be the EPP spokesperson on this committee, so it's also close to my heart. And thanks for the invitation here. It's been a wonderful discussion. I just wish we had more time.
Yes, we should have more time, but since we began 3 minutes past, there's still time exactly for the basically closing remarks and answers to any of the questions that remain. And I would urge you, Mr. Sikorski, to touch base on the question of what Europe can do to fill in the gap on some call it strategic autonomy. Maybe that's a vague term, but simply on delivering on security in real terms in Europe, in the region here. What do you think you also in the European Parliament can do or are working on in that regard to be a real partner to the US?
First of all, let me agree with Vladimir that we need to become the global rule setter in cyber, and we can. Or put it differently, we are the only ones who have a chance. China is not going to do it, Russia is not going to do it, and the US Congress is captured. And we have the size of the market, and we are not captured, and our population is sensitive to privacy issues, and we started doing it. There is regulation on AI, there is the Commission paper on digital services, but we need to do far, far more. And on this, we could be a very valuable partner of the US vis-a-vis China. Secondly, I think taxing tech, taxing goes beyond tech, of course. Companies should pay some tax somewhere. I'm a pro low tax kind of guy, but it should not be at the expense of smaller companies. The playing field should be more level on this. And I think for the first time we have a joint interest with the US. They also see the seepage away of revenue. And thirdly, Biden spoke before he became president on sorting out tax havens. It's estimated that 50 trillion dollars is hidden away. Imagine what we could do with the money, and we need it desperately. If we could tax all of it and perhaps confiscate some of it. And remember, we've never legislated for these things to be created. These things exist thanks to loopholes in legislation. We could pass legislation that makes it illegal for our citizens and our companies to use these avoidance schemes. We can do this, and this would be a very good thing. But as regards autonomy, there are two areas without which it will never happen. One is defense, and here Europe is not serious. We've started a defense budget, but it was supposed to be 13 billion. It would have been a good beginning. It's been cut to 7. You can't do serious defense on 1 billion per annum for a whole continent. Poland alone spends 11 billion euros. With defense, it's very simple. It's very expensive, therefore follow the money. If they're not committing the money, they're not serious. And the second is also about money. It's to do with the euro becoming a reserve currency and being autonomous of the dollar clearing mechanism. And of course, we're not. We tried to create a very limited payment instrument with Iran, only to do, I stress, to do with things that are permitted, like pharmaceuticals and food. And even that doesn't work. So I'm afraid it's all just talk, that member states are not serious about it.
Well, that's not optimistic, but the optimistic notes were there that that there are actually ambitions to legislate some of the things and the loopholes to be closed. Thank you so much. It's merely a beginning of our chat, I believe, and we will have a lot of other discussions on 100 days of Joe Biden presidency, and we definitely should keep in mind many of the statements and remarks by Mr. Radosław Sikorski, Ms. Katalin Czech, Mr. Vlado Bilčík, who joined us for today's discussion. Thank you all for being with us, and we'll make it all, the recording later available for everyone. I do remind everyone then it's also a privilege of using these discussions. You can subscribe. You can subscribe to Visegrad Insight to read more stories on Central European perspective. And you can do that for €1 for 2 months even with the code Join the Club. So I invite you now to do that. All of you that are present, you can also share this code, of course. Thanks. It was lovely to see you all. Really true pleasure. Great questions. Fantastic discussion. And apologies for any technical questions that we encountered. My apologies to Joseph Quinn. But I think he texted me just in the moment. He was very happy to get such a big fame. We are here also to promote SIPA people.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Do widzenia.
Do widzenia.
Dziękuję.